Buddy, thank you for joining us today. Uh, Nisha will continue with getting our material up and she can do the presentation. But what we're going to be talking about today is post-investment relationship management. How do you nurture those ventures to be able to raise capital and manage then those relationships over time? The challenge that we'll find that we're actually having you address is that once you raise capital, it's very difficult to actually make sure you're providing that information that your investor is looking for in a time and a way they want to. And so what we have here today is we have Grant and Raj who are going to actually give you a little bit of their backgrounds in a minute, but they can actually show you why this is so critical to your future success. The challenge becomes often when you raise money that we see a lot of times that there's there will be a discontent that comes between the investment team and the management team that leads to changes that take place, and we are trying to avoid that. Would you want to just walk us in?
Thank you so much, James. Welcome, everybody. And it's with gratitude and respect that we acknowledge the lands on which Foresight operates are the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. And as for myself, I'm speaking to you from Calgary, which is within the Treaty 7 territory. These are the traditional lands of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Siksika, Kenai, Piikani First Nations, and the Tsuut'ina First Nation and the Stoney Nakoda First Nation. Before we start, I want to say a few words about Foresight. We are Canada's largest clean tech network. We have supported over 1,200 Canadian clean tech companies with over $1.5 billion funding for them. We have 250 EIRs and mentors and a network of 400 private capital partners, 1,500 national and global partners. Our community reaches to about 15,000, and since our inceptions, we have curated over 25,000 different climate connections. Our purpose is to help the world do more with less sustainably. And our mission is to connect with industry with world's best clean technologies. This is how we are going to get there. We foster collaboration, break down silos, and deliver action-oriented supports that accelerate Canada's clean technology, innovation, adoption, and export growth. Before we begin, here are a few housekeeping notes. Please use the chat option to post your questions to the panel. This session will be recorded and you will receive a recording in a couple of days. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our panelists today, Dheeraj Goyal, founder and managing partner, Get Fresh Ventures, and Grant Lawrence, president of Valhalla Capital. Welcome, Dheeraj and Grant, and over to our moderator, James Shipea, who is our senior executive in residence at Foresight, who will also moderate this session. Over to you, James.
Thanks, Nisha. And again, we've already given you what we're going to actually address. So because we have so much material to actually cover and it is so important, I'd like to turn it over to both Grant and Dheeraj, who are going to walk us through how do you manage these investments? How do you manage your relationships? And when should you be starting? And what are some of the things that you should do? And what are the fatal flaws that happens? And we're actually going to dig into some examples of how do you deal with that. So let me turn it over to Grant. He can give you a little bit of his background, and then we can and we'll go from there. Grant.
Okay, great. Well, hi everybody. Look forward to answering questions for you and being available after this if you wish to continue discussions, because there's going to be a lot here today. My background, I was being in the software industry. I was with 3 different startups. One took public on the NASDAQ, second one 3M bought us, and the third one, out of the blue, a company out of California knocked on our door and said, we want to buy you. From there, I it took 7 years off of work and just worked my butt off in 2 nonprofits, and then went back to 2 startups, one in Sri Lanka and one in Sweden. But I'm based in the interior of BC in the Kelowna area, and I now run the BC chapters of a angel investment organization, and happy to be an EIR with Foresight as well. So I look forward to sharing some insights here and answering more questions.
Dheeraj, can you give us a little bit of your background?
Yeah. And the CEO of Get Fresh Ventures. We are a venture partner. We work with early stage companies from sometimes inception, and actually some late stage companies where they've plateaued in their growth. Our focus is to work with engineers to re-engineer the product, the primary product of what they're building, which is the company itself, into a lean, mean, high growth, profitable machine that generates high enterprise value. What our team brings is myself in particular, with 30 years of operational experience. I've been an engineer at heart, built companies during the dot-com bust and the Great Recession of '08. When capital was light and we had to use ingenuity and scarcity was the name of the game. Managed to build a couple of $100 million companies, had a couple of exits. And now, with my kids, I decided to have kids late in life, so I could spend all that time working and building companies. Now with kids at home, my focus is to help other founders get in the grind and build these scalable, profitable companies. So our goal is to maximize our enterprise value in terms of the positions we have in our company and grow our portfolio and grow all our founders to generational wealth.
Thanks, Daraj. You actually said something that was something that I have really been harping on, and that's when you're approaching investors and approaching capital, you're not selling your product, you're actually selling your company. And that's a very different mindset.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're talking about not just how you're doing that, Grant, maybe you could walk us through a little bit of process that you see has what's important, what's not important, with respect to managing the relationship with respect to your investors once you've landed them.
Certainly. I'll just share a screen here real quick, if I can figure out the right screen. Okay, so the keys to, I think, helping you understand, let's see, next slide, how to get to it. There we go. It's where are you at today? Who is the audience that you're going to be looking at to receive this information as you've now received capital? You've got some money. Is it from friends and family? Is it the angels? Is it institutional? Where is it coming from? Large family offices? Is it Series A, B, C? So knowing your audience, and then of course the regulations around that. There's some regulations if you're already public, or if you intend to be going public, why not act as a public company and start to practice that today? And what is it, the key points that you need to share up front? And what do you think they want to hear? So if you've been promoting, hey, this is where we're going to succeed, here's our objectives for the year. Are we measuring against those objectives properly? And then what is the medium that you're going to use to communicate that, and how long will it be? Now, of course, the other step is, where are we going? If you plan to do an IPO, then you start to act like you're doing an IPO. If you're planning to stay just private, and you want to be a merger and acquisition, then that's a different type of information that you want to be putting out there. And then the context. So lots of things here to consider, and Daraj and James and I can share with you, of course, the frequency that I see some investor updates, how long they are, and then where are they going forward with that. So from a context, you really need to promote, of course, the investors should know the stage you're in, should know the industry, but you may want to remind them. Investors can have 5, 10, 20, 50 investments. They go, okay, what's this one? I can't recall. So just play it as though somebody's reading it the first time. And the funding that you've based on the funding that you received, measurements. How did we measure from our last update to today's update against objectives, stated goals? Advisors, are they on board? So the context here is to really paint a picture of where you're starting from and where you're moving to. The important aspects of it are to, I think, upfront make some important distinctions about, here's the quick executive summary, then you can dive into it, and then you can have, I would suggest you have an ask and you have a thank you. So you can keep it quite short, but you can make it much longer depending on who your audience is. Daraj has got a good example here that we can dive into. Here, Daraj, is switch out here.
Just to give everyone context, I'm not sharing this brand or this solution as a communications tool because I get anything out of it. By the way, if anyone wants to use the platform, just ping me after, and I'll get you our partnership code. I'm intrinsically lazy. It's partly because of my ADHD, and I hate engineering anything from scratch, and especially with investor updates. Now, to give you context in terms of why investor updates matter, if you think about it from the perspective of, okay, I need to send investors an update so that they know how well I'm doing, then what you're doing is you're building communication to communicate externally so that the investor can be satisfied. But what I usually use it for the first time I start working with a founder is to get the founder to really enunciate the story. It becomes the platform by which we actually build our strategy and our go-to-market. Because what you tell in the investor update is essentially your go-to-market strategy that you're going to commit to. So if you don't have a marketing plan, this is the next best thing. In fact, this is probably the first thing that then translates into the marketing plan, the sales plan, and so on. If you can't back what you tell investors by your economics, by your execution, and by your results, those investor updates are useless. So contextually, when I think about investor updates, it's not about investors because they've already put money in. Yes, we're talking about what happens after the capital journey, but it's investors that are going to even become investors on for your company. In this situation, this is a company, and I'm not going to run through where you can read everything because some of this is confidential, but I want to give you the perspective of what this actually looks like. So this company, the founders are 100% owners at the cap table. We haven't actually even taken any equity, but we are going to be raising right now. This is going back to fall 2022. We make the blatant commitment. Now, if anyone's done email marketing, people don't read your email, they read the subject. So we needed to hook everyone on what the hell we were actually going to do, which is 10 million in revenue in 2023. We send this at an appropriate time of the year when everyone's doing budgeting. We shortlist companies in the travel space, and we sent it all out. We sent them a LinkedIn and said, check this out when you get a chance. Most, I would say about 95% didn't read the whole email. They probably just went through these bits here. But then what's interesting that happened is we sent this 3 months later, and we said we did $1 million in January. We ended up doing 12 and a bit on the trajectory of this growth. And that's when they went back to the first email because we saw everyone opening up the email. By the way, I can see all the stats of who opened it up, who clicked, and so on. And we saw those same people going back and reading the first email go, okay, wait. I remember these guys sending an email. And by the way, we linked the email we linked all the updates in our email as well. This is a good example here where we show all the updates so people can go back themselves. And essentially what you're communicating, and it depends on the investor. An angel investor is going to look at things differently than a VC. Is this a professional investor that invests and they're constantly looking at the economics of the various investments versus they're making a fringe investment? Between the two, there's always a combination of that storytelling and that punch, and then the other side, which is the economics and how well you're doing. The key is whatever you're going to communicate to the investor, you've got to make sure that you can actually execute. And this is what actually forces the discipline in your company against what you're trying to achieve. You got to admit reality to a large degree, where your next update, what you want to show is that you've met or and I call it meet or beat your target. And when you can constantly show this as an ongoing basis, that's when investors sit up. The angel is going to be seeing this as a rocket ship. The VC is going to be looking at this as going, okay, this is the potential. I like where this is going, and that professional investor is going to want to start to understand that market. And depending on the investor, they're going to start reaching out to you when you send an update. Either if they're an incumbent investor, they might be thinking about something that's happening in the industry where you have a clear ask in your update. So we always have asks. That's a key part of our updates as well. Usually we have our plan if there's no an explicit ask, but the intent is to engage the investors so that they come back and want to help you. And generally, if you're seeing them as a potential, you also want to outreach to them as well. When you communicate in this context of providing the story, providing the economics, showing where you're going, and then achieving it, even if it's not a monetary target, you build confidence in that audience, and you build willingness and interest to lean in. And that's where you start to translate those investors to partners, and what I call capital partners, because if they're not actively building the company, they provide a capital, which means that they're building the company with you with their capital, and they should be as interested in supporting you and your outcomes and your objectives. The good news is if you do this even before you raise, or even after you raise, as you're going through your rounds, for example, we constantly add to our contact list here, and we'll classify them based on the folks that we see to anticipate our Series A. They start coming in, and you gain in new investors as well as you educate your existing investors, and a lot of times they end up talking to each other. So it sets you up for your next round. It also gets people to start thinking about potential partners that might be interested in terms of acquiring you. Communicating with your investors is like communicating with a community. You know how they say, like, it takes a village to raise a baby. It takes a village of partners in that sense, as well as folks in the peanut gallery, to give you some perspective on the options available to you and where you're headed. They're your eyes and ears of the ground that you can't see, so you can which you can leverage then to get to where you want to go.
Dres, what is the platform that you're utilizing here?
It's visible.vc.
Okay. What I love about this is that it actually provides information back to you. So like you're providing information out, but more importantly, it's kind of like a virtual data room where you're gaining the information of who's looking at what. What I was wondering about when I was going through this is, what's the best? Yeah, obviously you started this before you've actually gone and raised.
Yeah.
So, Grant, what's your views with respect to when you should be communicating, and do you have other examples of other ways of doing it? And maybe, Grant, maybe a touch on ways that are not effective.
Yeah. So I've got 4 examples here, which you can all determine whether you feel it's effective or not. I'll give some of my opinions on them. I think getting into the habit, as Daraj said, the earlier the better. Start to do it. So Daraj's example, they're not even public. They're not raising. So it's good to get the word out there. Because you're trying to either, in that case, establish credibility or just continue to build the credibility. Because the one thing that investors don't want to have is that 11th hour call, emergency call. So in these updates, ensure you got the good news and the bad news, right? Hey, we didn't hit this, or we found that this was not working, so we had to pivot real quick and do something over here. Because that trust, when I'm investing as an angel investor, I want to evaluate, will I take a call at midnight on Sunday from the founder? That's one of my litmus tests. And if the answer is yes, then that's a go forward to continue the discussion, maybe write a check. But the flip side is they need to really create some transparency and openness and honestness so that I can see if they're going to have running into this. And I just had one where they didn't scream loud enough. They didn't tell us they were really between a rock and a hard place. And if I'd known, but it didn't come out clear. And so the same comment from the other investors, I didn't know they were that desperate. Well, they took money from the next round and they squashed all the investors. It was like, so now we're upset. So one, you didn't yell loud enough. You didn't make it obvious, and now you squashed us. So will I do business with this person again? No, not a chance. And on the flip side, we had one where they said, you know, COVID has killed our business. We're going out of business, guys. Heads up. You know, he gave us a long runway. And because they were so open and honest, when they came back around and said, here's our next, I wrote a check to them immediately, even though the first time, you know, you either got a little bit of money back or none, right?
So it is about that engagement to build trust, because you now are trusting that individual. And Diraj's example was definitively like first class engagement, because you can see absolutely everything, and it's that continuous. So you set yourself apart from, like, it really does set yourself apart from the 99% that aren't doing this.
Yeah, I mean, there's two aspects of investor reporting, right? There's the structural stuff, which is your quarterly updates, your board updates. That happens on the quarter. You got your board advisors. It's a very structured update. Okay, here's what we said we're going to do. Here's what we're doing. You run through all the pieces. It's a very it's a model of how every company updates. And you know, I get very surprised when I see investors, companies at the seed or Series A who don't actually have that in place and a proper update. I've seen very dismal versions of that. But there's the other side, which is also the storytelling, and this is the wider audience, right? This is the audience that are investors but not at the board. And what is the story that you're telling them? And you know, simply sending a pitch deck is not sufficient. It's engaging them. People have a slice of attention. We're in the attention economy. Everyone is trying to buy a slice of everybody's attention. Their email is going to use up more of their mental space as a whole than your company. But you want them to think about you when you're not in the room. You want them to think about you when they're not looking at the email. And you want them to think about you when they're having a conversation with some partner that could be beneficial to you, or some investor that would be great for the business. And that's really the core of the communication. How you do that is going to be dependent on the audience and the channel that and you go through. In some cases, it's a WhatsApp group with like 50 people on it. You know, in some cases it's email. In some cases it's both. So it really depends on what you're trying to achieve with your investors, and how engaged do you need them to be, versus whether they're passive investors and they're just doing it to check the boxes that they showed up.
Yeah,
Grant, can you share with us? Can you share some examples?
Sure, I'll share a couple of examples, James, that we were saying it was hard to hear you.
Oh, sorry. So can you share us a couple of examples of different ways that you've seen?
Certainly. Okay. So here's one. So I'm going to share two in a row here that are back to back from companies that I'm not investing in. Right? Dallas here sends this out to me. She pitched probably a year and a half ago. So this is a female femtech, I guess they're calling it. You know, gives a quick refresh right up front, then some highlights immediately. You know, they've hired somebody, upcoming priorities, and then the ask and a special thanks. So they do cover quite a bit, and a little bit more about the McKinsey report. So you can take this.
So format. I get these. Sorry, yeah, I get these as well.
Yeah, okay.
I get these from Dallas as well, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And then there's the other ones where I get it as a link and say, here's our update. And I'm not an investor, but I do know the founder. And I said, I'm not clicking a link. So, you know, how you're going to do this depends on the platform, the messaging here. And I'll receive these from Dallas. And on this one, I gave her feedback and said, I suggest doing this, this, and this, which took time out of my day. It was just a friendly support for her because I like what she's doing.
Right.
This one is a legal up from a legal company. So case out of Vancouver. Again, a quick recap. You know, they did the actual too long did not read summary here up front, which is nice. Some of their key metrics, tailwinds, headwinds, a little bit of emojis to try and get across, you know, what's good or bad, the ask, and then thank yous as well. So you can see a common theme here on these ones. Renaissance, I'm an investor in. So it's a music platform. And they actually give a link to a video for Arpan here, the CEO, to give an update. So you can either read this or listen to about a 3-minute video, which is the only person I've seen do this. So they give some really big stats here, how they're growing, the highlights, their launches, their awards, their challenges. You know, this is good. They had to go and spend more money to restructure their back end on the technology and where they're moving forward. Again, an ask and thank yous as well. So quite good. This is probably the most unusual one. Beat Dab. Everything that's pink here leads to the song, which they took the code out of. I've never spent any time but once listening to one of the songs, but it just was, for me, it was pretty cool, but also not critically important. So they talk about in brackets is what they're showing their March wins, and you see that this is number 30. So they're doing this on a very regular basis. Their challenges, their goals, and then some shout outs and how we can help. So these in brackets did not jump out to me. I thought they could have made them a little bit more, okay, this is the title of this section. How are we going? And they've done a very good job, because what they also did then was there's not a lot of great stats in here. They don't show any revenues, they don't show the growth, but they kept it in stealth mode on purpose. You know, they've got some good stuff here. It's case study coming up. I'll share with you one other thing that they did, because they took this one step further to do a thank you to the investors, and also as a cultural thing. They created I'll call it a scrapbook. So they physically sent out a hard copy for their first year, which was kind of cool. They got pictures of their activities during the year. All their key investors are in there, and they made this pretty interesting. So it became a cultural thing. It became a thank you to the investors, you know, who the team is, their advisory board. And it was quite amazing that they have, you know, a past prime minister on their advisory board. That just floored me that they're able to get that done. So I'll just go through a few slides, you know, where they went, their events together, and their learning sessions, the lunch and learns that they had, Stephen Harper coming in. So they're able to now reach out and make the investors feel like part of the team. So when Andrew calls and he says, hey, I have a challenge, I will pick up the phone and talk to him, because he did such a nice job doing something like this. So it was an investor update, or investor year in review, and that took a lot of time and effort for them to do. This is a scrapbook. I've not seen anybody else do that. I don't know if James or Daraj, you guys seen somebody do that type
well,
of thing.
the Andrew was in my hyper growth cohort. He actually didn't believe in the human side. He's a technologist and a numbers guy. So I made his company build out a culture a handbook, and he saw the results of that, which was Easy Market back then, and he was the CRO. That culture book did so well that he's taken that format, and I'm so glad to see that he's using it even at VDAP.
Yeah.
You know, the interesting thing, Grant, when I take a look at those, so there's some real positive. There's some that are just kind of look like they're the also rans, like they just continue to do what everybody else does. But one thing that doesn't come across is, Indraj, in your example, when you're using Visible, you actually can tell who's looking at what. So
I mean, yeah.
Like if you're from the team's perspective, they can take a look at if somebody's looking at this information that they've sent out. So they now know who's actually engaged.
I mean, it's a fundamentals of performance growth, right? And it's whether it's performance sales, performance marketing, performance whatever. You've got an audience, and you're engaging them, you're selling to them, you're getting you're trying to build gravity and trust with them. it's always good to know who's looking at it. And whether it's email marketing or your Facebook ads or whatever, you've got that visibility. Why shouldn't you have that with your investors?
Right.
Yeah, and that's a good point, Raj, because one of those four, which I won't say which, they came across, one of the investors actually shared it out to a competitor. So now that investor is like the bizarrest thing. So it's now ended up that the updates aren't as frequent and they're not as detailed. Right? It was just bizarre to hear, well, somebody let this leak out and they didn't keep it within this, the confines of the investor group.
Okay, so that comes one of the fatal flaws when you're doing this, or issues with respect to that you need to look at and think about, because it really comes down to probably if you're doing this, you need to have in the back of your mind, am I prepared to have this printed on the front page of the Wall Street Journal?
Well, so I have a very simple way to address that. I heard this from a mentor a very long time ago. There's three different numbers you always have to plan towards. What you tell the investor, what you tell management, and what you tell the team. That's whether it's numbers or story. You always provide the most conservative version to your investors. You provide the most aggressive version to the team so that they're shooting for further than what you commit to your investors. Management is what you agree to in reality. And what you keep close with is management should be everything that keeps proprietary, whether that's your data, your partnerships, your innovation. What you tell to your investors is what you're willing to tell to the street, and adjacent to that. I wouldn't send beyond that. And if you've got something that's proprietary, pick up the phone, have the one-on-one. You don't need to blast it out.
Right. Yeah, there's things that are just become too much information. When we're looking at this, so I think I hear from both of you that it's never too early to actually start establishing your practices with respect to communicating information, and that puts in place your not just practices, it's your procedures, and like you're saying, Daraj, how you manage this information, which is just as important. I'd be interested in knowing from your perspective, um, how do you see this with respect to what's shared with boards, or is that just the same thing as what's going with management?
Well, yeah. So I think boards, you cannot. I mean, there's a little bit of a segment there, right? It's not a hard and fast rule of the 1, 2, 3 of investors, management, and team. With the board, you've got to get them closer to that reality point of what you're committing to at a management level, because it's really hard for you to constantly keep separating the conversation. The board is going to, if you're constantly beating your targets on massively on a constant basis, they're going to know you're sandbagging on that constant basis, right? Like, so you want reality, and your board is a smaller, tighter group, and they're the ones that are going to be the most involved and most aware, and likely they're going to be talking to other executives to get visibility. So it really depends on how involved your board is and how much do you need to lean on them and how involved they are in other aspects of the company.
So, Grant, when you're looking at this as far as the sharing of the information, do you look at stakeholders versus shareholders as far as what's going out, or do you place them all in the exact same boat? Because, like, obviously the non-dilutive investors are key to your business just as much as the dilutive ones, to the extent that you can get that, because it's obviously leveraging your investment. How do you look at that side?
Yeah, so I had that question because I was saying there's KPIs in here that you've not included. In some cases, as an investor, I want to know, okay, what's your burn rate and how much runway do you have left? Right. And none of those examples that were shown show that at all. Right. Whereas
Right.
I've had others come, we got 12 months of runway. We look like when we get to the 12th month, we may have another round because we're growing at X. So we can't grow just through revenue or non-dilutive because we need to do this land grab, or the demand's there. Let's go fill the demand, whatever the reason. So I like to see that, so I can say, okay, there is another round. That means I can use my ROFR. So I'm going to start to put some cash aside for that round in 12 months or whatever it may be. So I find that good. However, if that person is not an investor, do you want to include that sensitive information, right? Are they going to be part of that team that you think are going to come in that future round? You don't have to, give the gruesome details of, hey, we're burning 50,000 a month with this staff size. We're going to hire this number more staff. We have to go out and get AWS services that are going to cost, X as well. So outside of that, if it's suppliers, partners, that I wouldn't really share with them as much whatsoever. That's more of, unless you feel that they can play an investor role. Because some of the suppliers think, oh, I love what you're doing. Can I be part of this? If you think that suppliers can be an investor role, the partners may come in as technical partners, etc., can come in, and that's a call and a judgment call you have to make. I've seen some founders that are super transparent and almost too much information, and others that hold back and go, okay, well, where's the specs? Like, what's your year over year or month over month? What's your unit economics? They're not there. So I'd love to see at the top, unit economics against objectives, then a quick text, description on, okay, where are we succeeding, where are we failing, where are we challenged, and then you get into all the gruesome detail, because I just don't have time to read long emails. So at the top, and you go, I got my attention, I'm going to jump to that section and read it, especially the ask section.
Well, when I'm thinking about one of the points that you had raised about this is the frequency, and when you're looking at investor relations, you're actually investing your time in managing these relationships. And when you look at all the different things you're trying to get done, it seems like it could be very time consuming and costly from that perspective, because preparing those books is not a cheap event, but it does set them apart. So I think you do need to think of this as far as an investment perspective. When one of the things that you talked about was the frequency of this, and Darash, you were talking about like you're seeing these things on a quarterly basis. Is there magic to how often you should do this, and is there times when you just it becomes too much, or is there a way of doing more detailed on one basis and very short on others? What are your thoughts with respect to that?
Go ahead, Raj.
I think it comes down to your capacity to invest in keeping the company growing versus communicating. And if you're early stage and you're scraping by and it's all grit, you don't need a complex update. A back of the napkin update in terms of getting them to lean in on the specific areas that you're challenged with. Your communication might be more phone calls than they are email updates. But the more mature you get, it's an eventuality that you're going to have to get structured in your communication. It's not going to go away. It's only going to get more sophisticated. The larger you get, the more institutional the investors are at the table. So as soon as you can, implement this as an operational practice. And frankly, if you're planning on a yearly and a quarterly basis, and you've got the operational practice around your strategy and your planning and your execution and your reporting, this should be a couple of additional steps, right? Like, I had a 15-page execution document at Hootsuite on building out our quarterly updates, and it took 2 weeks. And there was a dedicated team of 8 people that were focused on that. And it wasn't just about doing the updates; it was doing the strategy, planning the next quarter, looking at the insights and the analytics. It was a business development team that was responsible for the strategy side, so it was a strategy team. That's the sophistication you get to when you're doing 150, 200 million a year, because you've got your planning team there. The earlier you are, the planning happens in the CEO's head. So the fidelity of the communication will change over time. Now, if you get through a pandemic situation, right, or a force majeure situation in the company, and you don't have the time to do it, well, that's the reality, and change the communication to be more succinct and highlight what you're actually dealing with, because that's like in Grant's example, you're vocalizing the challenges you're having. You're not quietly ruminating on it, and then shocking the investors after the fact. Your fidelity of communication can change. It doesn't have to, you can go from sophisticated to simple, and then back to sophisticated when things are back and well again. Think of it like you hit a car crash. You're not going to drive the same way, but you're going to fix it up and get back to normal. So it really depends on what you need to communicate for who, when, and what do you expect to get out of it.
So again, it's knowing your audience. So if it's friends and family to start, you may get away with, hey, we'll chat about it over Christmas. We'll give you an update over the birthday party, etc., or over the golf course when you're out together. As soon as you start to take money from outside of that family and friends round, then I think you owe it to those founders to the investors at least quarterly. But you can depend on the frequency. You may ask, hey, do you guys want more detail? Do you want less detail? Or just more frequently or less frequently? I've got one fellow who's I've invested in. He runs a monthly online session. They'll take Q&A. So it's a call like this. He goes through product, marketing, like the whole gamut. And he's already had 2 unicorn exits. So I'm just surprised that he actually takes this time to spend an hour and a half with all the investors. And there's anywhere from 100 to 200 investors on the call, and they just type in their questions, and he goes through it all, and then he puts up his calendar and goes, here's a calendar link for me if you want 15 minutes. Like, it's amazing the access to this gentleman.
Well, the retort I usually hear, is like, well, he can do it. He's got a couple of $1 billion exits. Hey, I always come back. It's like, maybe he's got a couple of $1 billion exits because he does this.
Yeah. Exactly. That's exactly the thing is like, hello, the reason we was able to do it is because he's doing these things. Yeah. I do have there's a question in the Q&A. And I'm going to take a little bit of try and interpret a little bit on that. But guys, do you think that there is a difference in the information that's going to be presented during a raise versus post raise and how you're communicating to the or are you actually maintaining the same? I know there's a line here about what you're actually going to share, because obviously we've already talked about there's some things there's things that you don't put out publicly. You don't put out what you're having protected. You're not putting out something that, well, if it's really strategic and it goes into the marketplace, you could find your competitors are actually just now got your plans, which is, you're not prepared to do that. So thoughts with respect to pre-raise, because clearly there's going to be some elements there, and post-raise?
Certainly. So I've seen 3 levels of due diligence data rooms. So in one case, the fellow said, here it is, wide open, anybody can see it if it had the link. Now, it's not being distributed widely. Second one required an NDA. And the third one, he would select who could see into that. So I only got to the second one, which was fine. I didn't need any more details. But if you can do it consistently pre and post, then you don't have to think about, okay, what did I say to that person? What did I say to this person? Like, it just makes your life so much simpler. Okay, here's the data. This is the set that's going to go out to the investors that are interested. They can get deeper into it. I can give them more access as needed as their questions come up. And then post, it should be the same messaging, in my opinion, just so you have consistency and you're practicing that for when you have more investors, or you're going to be acquired, or you're going to be, IPO, whatever that is.
Raj, any thoughts on that?
in terms of pre-investment and post-investment, and to Grant's point, a tiered a data room depth and breadth of information makes sense. But I think of it as everything is a funnel, right? Like and again, it's like fidelity as you get deeper and down. What do they need to know enough to take the next step? What do they need to know enough to take the next step? And each point communicates the right amount of information that they stay interested and want to dig deeper. If you throw the whole thing at them at the top, usually people just shy away from the breadth of information, don't understand it, and just kind of keep on moving. So like in standard marketing, you don't overwhelm the audience. You give them what they need to take the next step and the next step and the next step. And whether it's your B2B sales funnel or it's a investor funnel, there's degrees of communication and degrees of engagement that you will help them get through to understand more about the business. Now, in terms of what you're pre-communicating and post-communicating, once they've written you a check, yes, they get more visibility. Of course, you always want to control how much you communicate so that you don't cause more ruckus with the investors leaning in too far. But you need to communicate with reality, because you're going to have to communicate again in 3 months, and you better have the same story. So on the pre-investment, figure out whether they're really interested by going through your investor journey, and figure out where they are in the interest level to give them the depth of information. On post-investment, you got to be that much more transparent, but not too much where there's more questions than they would be helpful in your ability to run the business.
What do you see with respect to how does your view change when you're looking at these information from companies as an investor? What is it that you really would like to see, and in which way? Draj, I see you're using Visible, so obviously that's a platform for getting the information, but with respect to examples of types of information that are critical, or just have you seen things that are really off-putting that you really don't want to see in those updates?
I mean, I'll start with the optimal. I'm an engineer at heart and ran operations. I always like to see 3 to 6 quarters out. Like, okay, where are we going? High level master plan, and then what do you think you're going to achieve on the quarterly basis? Now, starting there, tell me what you're doing. A lot of companies, I see this hockey stick curve, right? Okay, is that really real? If it's real, then tell me what you're going to do. And on an ongoing basis, I want you to tell me what the next 2 quarters are going to look like with more fidelity, or 3 quarters, and then tell me what you're doing. And if you have to course correct, tell me how that course correction is. I can't remember everything about what you said the last time, so remind me about what you said against the high level story, 1 level deep, what you said you were going to do. Did you do it? If you didn't do it, why? What you're going to do about it, and what's next, and how can I help? What I get a lot of times is a wall of information that's not relevant right away without that summary. The depth is relevant if I see something interesting I want to dig in. That's where it's relevant. But starting with the depth and just throwing a bunch of information without that proper context so that I can follow the story along. Investors, if they're professional, context switch between companies all the time. And they're trying to ascertain the same thing. Are you doing well enough? Are you on the right path? Are you going to be in a tough situation? Am I still going to get liquidity in the 3 years I planned, or 5 years I planned, or whatever? But unless you're in a structured board setting, you don't really get that visibility, and that's what I think would be very, very helpful for investors at the table when they're looking into a business and getting those updates. Tell it to me like I'm a 5-year-old, and then I'll dig in.
Right, Grant. You see, with Valhalla, you're going to see hundreds of these things that come across your plate. You have
Yeah.
30 seconds. So what is it that's going to grab your attention from this perspective that you're going to actually go and read further or
Yeah,
not?
exactly. Yeah. A lot of what Daraj has said is what I'm looking for as well. I want that summary up front. I'm not an engineer, and I've got a short time span on reading. So now, if I've got lots of money in it, I'll read a lot deeper. But if it's, hey, I want to see how they're progressing because I'm going to write a second check, and if it doesn't capture me right away, then I may put that off. Say, okay, I'll read that, and then inevitably, the next update comes. Go, oh, I didn't read the last one. So I want to see a quick summary at the top. What are your KPIs and why? What did you promise to deliver, and what have you delivered against? And then dive into, okay, why was it successful or why it wasn't? What are you changing? And typically around product, sales, and team. So if you can talk about, hey, we're iterating the product really quickly, we're starting to get product market fit, or now we have product market fit, we're now going to go into new geographies or adjacent markets to grow. Why are you making those decisions? How did that come about? And then of course, the team, how's that coming along? How are they being developed? Who are you hiring? So for instance, I'll come back to BeatDAP just because I know when they did their last raise, they're going to go hire 50 people. Like in 6 weeks, they had to hire 50 people. So like, okay, well, what type of people? Data scientists, and then a few other marketing. So I knew one person that I introduced them to that could be a fit, because I don't know any data scientists, but on the other side, I was like, okay, here's one person. So they chatted, and they that led to another person for them. So they eventually found somebody, but it was only one way in which I could help when they had that ask. So I will read the ask and see if I can assist that. But that
So,
upfront, really short, quick, summary upfront.
okay, so let's put it another way. Form over substance. How much is how they're actually showing you something? Like, obviously, a lot of those examples, Grant, that you showed, they're very verbose, right?
Yes.
Even though they're point form, they're verbose. Daraj, your example, I saw there was actually some pictures in that were a little bit different. Thoughts with respect to form over substance with respect to investor relations.
Um, I see companies as two separate engines. The people who run the go-to-market and all the systems and processes that support them. And then together, that's one engine that drives revenue and growth. Um, I took a step back, and part of what I had to deal with in operations was data normalization, just getting everything normalized so I can see it apples to apples. If if it was up to me, I would see every company as revenue, growth rate, stage, years in business, gross margin, EBIT, percentage year over year on each, and then against target, and then what's the enterprise value, and is it on target to that? Right. So if I can normalize all my companies to there, I have some AI that can suck in all the decks and all the updates and filter it all down to that. That would be perfect. Then if you look at those numbers, that's what they ultimately want to see. That's what everyone wants to see. That's what the investment bankers want to see. That's what everybody will drill down to, your numbers. Now, where the story matters is the human side. That's the human engine part, right? Like, what is it that you're doing? What are you solving? Maybe I'm interested in the space. Maybe I care about clean tech. Maybe I care about this medical space because I had a family member deal with this. Maybe this is my profession from before. Those human elements build that emotional gravity on top of the numbers. Sometimes the numbers may not be great, but you will have the strong emotional capacity. Sometimes the numbers are great, but you don't give a shit about the company. Right. So it really comes down to the investor and what they're going to lean to. The angels, yes, they care about the numbers, but they're also making a more emotional decision. Well, actually, I would argue some VCs also make the emotional decision. But
Yeah.
when you get to the more sophisticated side, they're starting to adjudicate you on a line item. If you talk to like a company like Jonas Software or Constellation Software, they're going to buy you on 2 to 3 times your top line, based on a minimum of 20% growth rate. You know, if you're building a CRM company, you're not unique anymore. You're just a SaaS company building vertical CRM, and it's just a line item. Okay, well, what's your growth rate? What's your market size? And that normalized data. So if it came down to me, I would like to see all the normalized numbers so I can understand where you stand in the portfolio. But the emotional side is, do I care more about your company than the next one because of what you're doing?
Grant, thoughts?
Well, I like the fact that you know, get some excuse me, some of that data, and if there was a normalized version out there, I would be enthralled to that. But it seems that everybody wants to highlight different aspects of it, and including their traction and their growth. So if there was a way to do that, and I had a graduate from UBC said there's got to be a way to do this, and I do not remember the lady's name, but she was taking this on as a project, and I haven't heard from her, so I'm guessing that it hasn't hasn't taken
Grant,
place.
introduce me, because we've been working on it, right? Like Invisible actually has a platform
Yeah.
where it plugs in right into your accounting system so that you can start to get those data points. And if you look in terms of a standardized portfolio management, especially in terms of one of our companies is MIFO, where we can set up our companies with as unique assets. It's a family office management platform for private assets, especially when you're you know, making transactions on those assets. We can plug into the QuickBooks or the NetSuite. We can pull in all that data. We can actually start to plug into valuation data sets. Investment bankers are using this on a consistent basis, right? So they are the private equity guys that are constantly looking at these data sets. Now they're looking at it at a deeper level, but there is some basis of normalization of data where you can actually start to understand what the hell is going on in those companies. The swing for the fences companies are the ones that are going after the new world order, where it's kind of like you know, it's 1400s and they're talking about the new world and no one knows how big that thing is, right? So those are the ones where, you know, there's more storytelling about where you're going and what you're doing versus the economic value of your discounted cash flows and what those numbers mean. So the numbers matter in the sense of how you're performing and what you're saying you're going to do, but there's the storytelling element as well in terms of what you possibly can do with this engine that you built, which is where I think you have to start to think about the storytelling so you can engage the next layer of investor and the next layer of investor on the opportunity ahead.
Yeah, and that's where I think that we've now got three of the updates are now video calls. So one's that, you know, one I said he's already been a unicorn twice. The other one is taking place next week, and it's his third round. It's the fellow that did Ancestry.com, so this is his third startup, and he's doing video updates to us, and that's great. And the third one is a quarterly update. So we're not getting there is a newsletter, and they've got it all listed, but they've got it on a G drive. So they're not using a platform, Daraj or James. They're using a G drive. So I don't know how they track, you know, who's accessed it, did they read it, all that type of feedback information. But then they've got a good narrative going as well. So they got the stats on sales, growth, etc. But then they've got a very strong narrative on the traction of where they're at and where they're going. So it's covering both sides, and they're further along than the angel start. So I hear, you know, what stage are you at comes into play again as to what the information and the medium that you're going to use to deliver that message.
Well, guys, it has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much. To me, my takeaway: engagement to build trust. There is ways of doing that.
Yeah.
There's clearly one of the things I'd be taking away is that, well, if you've had 2 unicorn startups and you're still doing the video chat, you might be actually doing something right. Daraj, the visible actually approach really seems to be a really interesting one where it's not just how you're the information you're providing, but you're getting information back. So that was super helpful. I'm going to thank both of you. Nisha, I'm going to turn it over to you and you can walk us out. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. And obvious, guys, for the audience, you can reach out to Grant and Daraj if you've got questions. It was hugely appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, James. This was
Thank
a great
you.
session. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and thank you to our panel members too. This is the last session before summer, and we will resume these interesting webinars in September. Stay tuned, and thank you, and see you in the next session.
Yeah, have a great
Yeah,
summer.
reach out to me on LinkedIn if anyone has any questions or thoughts. When I get to it, I will.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. Have a great
Well,
summer.
cheers, everybody.
Thank you.
Take
Bye-bye.
care. Bye.